It's funny, I was always proud of the fact that on my films I always asked that the author's name be put ahead of the title. This started way back on the first Godfather movie. Mario Puzo, who wrote the novel, did not have that right, but I insisted on it. And then that went on with other projects, Bram Stoker's Dracula or John Grisham's The Rainmaker. I've always been proud of the fact that I always gave the author the premier position in the credits.
I believe in America. America has made my fortune. And I raised my daughter in the American fashion. I gave her freedom, but I taught her never to dishonor her family.
The Godfather opening is an interesting situation. I had, of course, written the screenplay of Patton before this movie, and Patton had a very famous, striking opening. And I was once out in a little cottage I had in Mill Valley writing the opening of The Godfather, working on the script just in the earliest phases, and I wrote maybe 3 or 4 pages, and a friend of mine came by, and I asked him to read them, and they started with the wedding and introducing all the characters, and he said to me, "Gee, Francis, you had such a terrific beginning in Patton. Why can't you come up with something a little unusual for The Godfather, something other than just cutting right to the wedding?" And when he left, I thought about it, and in the book, the part that was the most significant to me, I thought, was the notion that, of course, on the wedding day of the Don, the different people come, like the old Roman client system, and ask for favors, and, of course, having asked for a favor might one day be called upon. And especially, I thought the thing that explained it all to me was the undertaker's story, Bonacera's story, because, you know, he had come to America of laws, and yet sometimes the law did not reach down and protect the citizens, and so it was necessary to go to a godfather, a neighbor, a friend, a powerful friend, and ask for the kind of protection that perhaps the country didn't afford the citizens. And so that little piece always was especially intriguing to me. And later that afternoon, I wrote that as the beginning of the film, beginning with words that I thought were very apt for the film that I was about to make, which was "I believe in America," and the idea being starting very close on this man's face. In those days, when we made the film, this was high technology to be able to do a pullback so slow. I remember they brought this computerized zoom lens, and they programmed it to pull back for, you know, whatever it was, 3 minutes, very, very, very slowly, almost imperceptibly. And that's how we were able to get that opening shot. And indeed, that friend who suggested that I do something other than cutting right to the wedding actually performed a great service for the picture, if you like this opening.
That I cannot do.
I'll give you anything you ask.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel, for help. I can't remember the last time that you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee. Even though my wife is godmother to your only child.
It's interesting, the cat in Marlon's hand was not planned for. I just saw the cat kind of running around in the studio, and I just took it and I put it right in his hands without a word and said, "Here, Marlon." And he, of course, you know, he loves children and animals, and he immediately took to the cat, and the cat took to him, and it became part of the scene, not at all planned, and just a random idea.
But now you come to me and you say, "Don Corleone, give me justice." But you don't ask with respect. You don't offer friendship. You don't even think to call me Godfather. Instead, you come into my house on the day my daughter's to be married, and you ask me to do murder for money.
I ask you for justice.
That is not justice. Your daughter is still alive.
Let them suffer then.
This actor, I think I remember his name was Salvatore, was a wonderful actor. Marlon was very impressed with him, how he was able to so naturally explain this terrible story of his daughter. But he was just a natural Salvatore. I think he had maybe done some little theater work or something, but had not really been exposed much in the professional world. On The Godfather, we did very many open calls in which we invited actors who were not established at all to come, and then I would be there. And it was sort of a tradition that I had to always have some open calls so that actors who had no agents and no credits could be seen. And it's very interesting because in this film, someone I met in one of those open calls was Abe Vigoda, who played Tessio, and he had never really done a part of any importance and was just discovered in an open call. And so that habit of kind of being open to people who have no representation brought us two wonderful performances. Buonasera was played by Salvatore Corsito, and of course Abe Vigoda became very, very famous, well-known actor after this film.
Give this to Clemenza. I'm unreliable people that aren't going to be carried away.
In contrast to the darkness of the private office was the exterior of the wedding. And of course, this exterior is where my script originally had begun, with a big high shot of the people dancing and coming to the party. So really, this would have been, the exterior would have been the opening without that prologue, had this friend not reminded me that an unusual beginning is sometimes very good. I've never quite remember a wedding, maybe exactly this deluxe. It's funny to call it deluxe, but in my mind, in my memory, the weddings were what our family used to call football weddings. They were called football weddings because they were in a hall, and the only food were these little sandwiches that were wrapped up in a kind of paper marked as, salami, gabagol, prosciutto. And there were piles and piles of these sandwiches, and the people would go up and get them, and they would throw them to each other. Hey, send me 2 gabagols and a prosciutto. And of course, I remembered that and used it in this scene. Obviously, in my family, we didn't have FBI guys checking the license plates numbers, but in Mario's book, that was, of course, detail. And in a scene like this, the way I would do it is I would prepare a great deal of little index cards, and I would label on each index card what the vignette was. In this case, it might be Nick Conti coming in and being greeted by the Don, or it might be Clemenza dancing, asking for some wine from Paulie. Obviously, I had the obligation of introducing all these characters to the audience for the first time, and so this was the opportunity to do that. I think that was Richard Castellano's brother dancing right behind him with a smile. So I had this big stack of index cards, and it had all these little vignettes that I wanted to get. And we were really under pressure to shoot this wedding scene. We had, 2 days to do it all. The image of Tessio, this is Abe Vigoda, who was discovered in an open call, and I always remember the little kids, the little girls dancing on the shoes of some uncle. And this is my sister Talia with the purse, the bridal purse, and in my family as well, people would come with checks, cash money that they would give to the bride, and she would put it in the purse. And that's where the couple would get a start. Oh yeah, here's the football wedding with them tossing the sandwiches. Of course, in this sequence, I was dealing with relatives other than I knew. The notion of some important mafiosi coming and being disturbed if photographers took pictures. But all in all, it was designed to introduce the audience to the cast of characters, let them be comfortable with who everyone was, and yet have it be in an ambiance that suggested the Italian-American world that I came from myself.
I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your home.
Get out of here. Private party. Go on. What is it? Hey, it's my sister's wedding.
God damn FBI don't respect nothing. Come here, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here.
But towards the end, he was...
The Godfather's den was a set on a stage in Upper Manhattan near Harlem. We shot these scenes, I believe, first, and then later shot the scene afterwards and intercut it all. Two editors worked on The Godfather, William Reynolds and Peter Zinner, and Bill Reynolds took the first half of the movie and Peter Zinner took the second half, and then we joined like a railroad. Obviously, we're shooting the scenes with nothing outside the windows, just white paper and some light.
Thank you. Wait till you see the beautiful...
But it was always my thought to show the Don Corleone in the darkness in his chambers, meeting with clients. I call them clients in the oldest sense, people who, supplicants, people who have come for favors, and in contrast to the bright sun of the party.
He's not on the list, but Luca Brasi wants to see you.
Is this necessary?
He didn't expect to be invited to the wedding, so he wanted to thank you.
Don Corleone, I am honored and grateful.
The shot of Luca Brasi practicing his speech to Don Corleone was shot really after the scene where he actually presented it to Don Corleone. Luca Brasi was played by Lenny Montana, who was, I believe, a professional wrestler, and he wasn't really comfortable with saying lines or playing in a movie with Marlon Brando, so you can imagine how frazzled he was. The problem was that when he went up to do the scene with Marlon, he really froze up. He was supposed to say, "Oh, Don Corleone, I am here on the wedding day of your daughter to pay my respect," etc., but he could never quite get it out. So I got the idea, since he kept fumbling it, to shoot him in the garden, practicing it over and over and over and over again, sort of making a point out of the fact that he fumbles it out of nervousness, having practiced it so many, many times. And that's just an example of taking advantage of the accidents, and in this case, the problems that you have, an actor not being able to get through his scene, and then by showing him practicing those same lines, which was not in the script and was not supposed to be shot, that by putting that first, you make a point of how nervous he must have been.
You like your lasagna?
So having planted the scene of Lenny Montana, who is Luca Brasi, practicing over and over and over again his speech, now when we come to the scene where he is supposed to make it and he sort of screws up, it becomes a joke within the film. It's also interesting to note that in some of these shots, Marlon had a big sign on his forehead that said, "F you." And poor Luca was trying not to break up, and Marlon had put this sign just to frazzle him. In that scene, you see this notion I had of the children can burst in at any time, you know, and even in a solemn moment of loyalty between Luca and the Don. At the wedding, there was lots of music, the tarantellas and other Italian music, and my father was very anxious to begin a career composing. He had been a concert flutist, and so I asked him to write all of the tarantellas and organize this band, because I am a person who believes that a band in a movie should really be able to play. Very often in movies, it's cheaper to hire actors who just stay there with their instruments and don't really play. But I find as a technique that having a real band enables you to kind of control the crowd and get them in the mood, and the fact that the band actually plays. This is another expense, so it was another one of my requests that to the producers was just kind of spending money for nothing. The casting of the mom, she of course is a well-known singer of Sicilian descent. Morgana King, a well-known jazz singer, but when I met her in some audition situation, she just made me think of, you know, the kind of handsome, authentically Sicilian woman that would be his wife.
Also, some of the judges, they've all sent gifts.
There was a lot of tension on the set during the sequence. This wedding had to be done according to the schedule. I think it was 2.5 days, and this sequence was not shot early in the movie. It was shot midway through, and I was in great danger of being fired, and we had a studio kind of henchman there who was constantly pushing, and it was like a very uncomfortable situation to try to do all this stuff. Very often, although Gordon Willis didn't like to, I would ask to have 2 cameras. You'll see that there's some 2-camera work if you know how to spot that, usually the long lenses. And I was just desperately trying to get all this vitality and all these characters and introduce them, and yet had to do it under duress. And in fact, we weren't finishing, and they ordered me to either finish the wedding by the end of the 3rd day or just not finish it and use what I had. And so those shots with Michael and Kay, and not the one looking towards Johnny, but those shots were shot at night. It doesn't look like it, but the shot across Al onto Kay is in fact shot at night with lights just blasting in that small area. Gordon Willis was furious at having to do it, and I had to get it, so I had no choice. And I always remark how when you look at it, you really don't know the difference. Obviously, Johnny Fontane was inspired by a kind of Frank Sinatra characters, and my impressions of the young Frank Sinatra was of, you know, girls screaming when he crooned. And so I had the teenagers jumping up and down and screaming while the scene was going on. But again, I remind you that the shot of Al and the shot of Kay were shot at night and just lit to match with the party. Gordon did a very good job, although he was mad as hell at having to do it.
And as his career got better and better, he wanted to get out of it. Now, Johnny is my father's godson, and my father went to see this band leader, and he offered him $10,000 to let Johnny go. But the band leader said no. So the next day, my father went to see him, only this time with Luca Brasi. And within an hour, he signed a release for a certified check of $1,000.
How'd he do that?
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
What was that?
Luca Brasi held a gun to his head, and my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract. That's a true story. That's my family, Kay. It's not me.
Obviously, the extras were professional extras, but there were many of my family in there too. You'll see my mother bobbing around, dancing and singing and being one of the crowd, and some other relatives as well. But there were many, many characters to try to establish in this sequence, and we, as I said, we did it in 2.5 days. It was a tough enterprise, and you know, I always felt that I shot it very sloppily, as I felt I shot much of the picture in a rush, basically. We made The Godfather in 62 days. It cost about $6.5 million.
This is my brother, Mike.
Are you having a good time?
Huh? Yeah, this is your friend, huh?
I don't know what to do. My voice is weak. It's weak. Anyway, if I had this part in the picture, you know, it puts me right back up on top again. But this man out there, he won't give it to me. The head of the studio.
What's his name?
Waltz. He won't give it to me, and he says there's no chance. No chance.
Sonny? 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 Sonny, you in there?
What?
The old man wants to see you.
Yeah, 1 minute.
This lady singing the aria is one of my cousins, and she indeed sang arias from operas. Of course, my father was behind all of the musical acts. I was trying to vary the show with these different attractions.
Godfather, I don't know what
In the scene where Johnny Fontane sort of cracks up and cries in front of Don Corleone, you'll notice that the camera is on his back. And this is because Al Martino was, you know, not a terribly experienced actor. He was a charming singer, but he was having trouble getting the emotion that he needed. And so we decided to kind of put him on the desk and put his back to the camera, and then he could do anything he wanted. We could help prepare that with the sound. And then Marlon really shook him up and slapped his face and really worked him over something awful to get that rise out of him.
You look terrible. I want you to eat. I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Too late. They start shooting in a week.
You'll notice in this scene where he takes Johnny out the door that as they open the door, a lady who was an extra who was supposed to be walking by suddenly was shocked by the fact that now the scene was showing her, and she stands in the doorway and then backs up as to get out of the way. I always see that when I see the film because I know she was basically making a mistake, but I guess no one else notices it. It's an interesting story. I chose to work with Nino Rota to write the score, and the studio was not very comfortable with this choice. And when I finally brought back the music that Maestro Rota had done, put it in the picture, the studio hated it. Bob Evans hated the music and said it would never stay in. You know, he had just done a movie called Love Story in which the music was very popular. So he considered himself quite an expert on that. And we were at a stalemate. I kept saying to him, well, I mean, you can't take the music out. You can fire me and get another director and then order that other director to take the music out, but you'll have to fire me to take it out. This was a total bluff. I don't know where I came up with that idea, but he seemed to accept it. And so for a week, we just waited. We would go up every day to Bob Evans's house, myself and Walter Murch, and sit by the tennis court and wait for something to break. Finally, to break it, I suggested, well, let's show the movie with the music to an audience, and if they like the music, then we can keep it. And he said, well, who will decide? And I said, you can decide. So finally it was arranged. There was a little screening room, and I don't know, 30, 40 people were invited to come and see it, and we really showed it for the first time with the music. And when the screening was over, the people just all had smiles on their face and had enjoyed it so much. And I realized it wasn't only a preview of the music, but of the movie itself. And then I said, well, what about the music? What about the music? And they said, oh, it's wonderful. So Bob agreed to let the music stay, but he insisted that 2 cues be changed his way, and one was the old source music of when the plane lands in Hollywood. And although we had put it in as a kind of period music, I always think of that incident and the fact that that one piece of music was left over from this standoff with Bob Evans. The Hollywood scene with Jack Waltz was pretty much shot as second unit. As I said, this was very low budget production. That fellow walking is not, I hate to say this and ruin the illusion, but that was not Bobby Duvall. It was just some fellow we had walking in a couple of LA sets, and it wasn't really Gordy Willis or Dean Tavaleris working on it. It was just some cheap second unit. Now the scene inside the stage is in fact shot in New York, in the stage where we worked, an empty stage where we had our sets, the Don's office and stuff, and we shot the party where Bobby Duvall actually meets Jack Waltz there, and just shot that second unit leading up to it before.
Mr. Walski would grant us a small favor.
Walski's listening.
This was sort of the first test of power. In the book, you learn that Don Corleone's reputation is so big that even important Hollywood studio chief in the West Coast might have heard of it. So that ultimately the intimidation, according to the story, was able to get Johnny Fontane the part.
Talking son of a bitch. Let me lay it on the line for you and your boss, whoever he is. Johnny Fontane will never get that movie. I don't care how many Dago, Guinea, what...
They say this part of the story is based on Columbia Pictures and the head of Columbia Pictures and From Here to Eternity. I have no indication of the truth of that. I know that Mario took everything from little bits and pieces, little fragments, and concocted really a fiction. So we'll never really know what's true and what isn't true.
Check him out.
If you look very carefully here, you'll see that it's neither Bobby Duvall nor Jack Waltz, but two of my friends dressed up and walking around in this. We barely had a crew. We were a camera, and we went to some LA location, put a wig on one of my friends and a hat on the other. Now here in this scene in the stable, this was shot in New York. So really the movie was shot in New York in those 62 days, and with very little money we went and shot some second unit pieces later on, I was so embarrassed because we didn't have the actors, we didn't have the photographer. It was really like kind of UCLA film school. It's ironic working on what has become an important movie, but it was pretty flimsy at the time.
Johnny's godfather. To the Italian people, that's a very religious, sacred...
I had worked with Robert Duvall on a film called The Rain People. He helped us out. We had lost our actor in the role of the motorcycle cop, and Bobby Duvall helped us out and played that part. And I was so impressed with Bobby as an actor, how real he could be, and of course Jimmy Caan was in that movie as well. And as I said, when I read the book, it was sort of natural to have these people that had already had very happy relationship with Jimmy Caan. Bobby Duvall, as I said, I hadn't worked with Al Pacino, but he had definitely become a friend, and I wanted them to play the parts. And of course the studio had a million other ideas, and the casting period went on and on and on, and they kept asking me to test new people. I've never shot so many screen tests. We screen tested everybody. And I remember the head of Gulf and Western, which owned Paramount at this time, once said, and he had this incredible accent, he said, "We have all these tests and they're all terrible. Now all those actors cannot be terrible. We have one director. It's the director who's terrible." So I was in very, very deep trouble, and I'm not even sure how I survived, to be honest. Maybe the turning point was when they saw, I always thought it was the Sollozzo killing, that when they saw that together, that they saw there was something to what I was doing. It's interesting because that scene was shot the first week, and they were still planning to fire me on the third week. Obviously, all of the waltz sequence was shot second unit, again without Gordon Willis. My good friend William Butler shot this, Bill Butler. Interesting about the horse's head scene, that was at that time a very, very famous scene in the book. And the way it's described in the book, Waltz wakes up and he looks, and the horse's head is there on the bedpost. And I just felt it would be more horrible not to just have the horse there, but that he feels something wet in his bed, and he turns down the sheets and sees blood. And at first he thinks, my God, it could be me. Maybe I've been stabbed or something. And as he pulls the sheet, he sees the horse's head right under the covers. So it's quite different than in the book. In the film, it's maybe more effective. I'm not sure. I think that moment of doubt that maybe it was his own wound bleeding maybe contributed to the horror. Now, the controversy of the horse's head was very real at the time that the movie came out, because although in The Godfather, untold 10s and 20s of human beings are killed, the audiences rose up in anger over the fact that the horse had been killed. And many people asked, was that a real horse's head, and how did you do it? And I got letters from animal lovers, and the truth was that the horse came from a dog food company, that the horses are slaughtered to feed the animal lovers' little puppies and little poodles their dog food. And all we did is we went to the dog food company and we looked at the horses that were about to be slaughtered. We didn't ask for any to be slaughtered, but we looked and we saw one. The art director picked that one and said, when that horse is slaughtered, send us the head. And indeed, one day a crate with dry ice came with this horse's head in it. And that's the horse's head that we used in the shot.
I couldn't find out how much. The Tattaglia family is behind him here in New York. Now, they have to be in it for something.
What about his prison record?
2 terms, one in Italy, one here.
The scene of the meeting at the olive oil factory was shot on a real location in Little Italy, really right what is now Chinatown. And if you look up on that street, you can still see the painting. It says Genco Olive Oil Company, and that was where we shot the scene of them being received, where Sonny makes the faux pas and interjects a question.
Now we have the unions, we have the gambling, and they're the best things to have. But narcotics, it's a thing of the future. Now, if we don't get a piece of that action, we risk everything we have. I mean, not now, but 10 years from now.
So, what's your answer gonna be, Pop?
I made that anisette bottle myself because I remember my father, when I was young, they would make their own anisette, and the bottle would always be sort of a milky, cloudy liquid, and it would always have a piece of tape that said anisette, and I was very proud of that touch of authenticity. And to this day, I still make anisette, and I label it like that.
30%. In the first year...
The man who played Sollozzo was a wonderful, wonderful actor named Al Lettieri. He was such a good actor, and I just was so thrilled when I met him because he had the quality of a kind of Sicilian. The nickname was the Turk, and Al Lettieri had a chest like a barrel. The only man I ever knew that had a chest like that was John Wayne. And he was a very good actor, and of course he spoke Sicilian, and so I was very pleased to have him play this part.
Why do you come to me? Why do I deserve this generosity?
Now, this scene is very interesting because when Paramount Pictures saw the rushes of Marlon Brando, they were very, very upset. They thought that he was mumbling and that his acting wasn't good, and this was really the scene where it looked like I was going to get fired. You know, I don't even remember what it was that they didn't care for it, but I knew that it was a sort of a rallying call. It was in the middle of the week, and some of my friends said that they're trying to get another director to replace you. Now, one thing about a movie company, and a little tip I'll give to all the directors out there, is they'll never fire you midweek. They'll never fire you on a Wednesday. They will always wait till the weekend to fire you, because in their minds they feel that there'll be able to be a transition and the new director will come on a Monday and there'll be no loss of time. So I suggested on the Wednesday, why can't I go and I'll reshoot the scene with Marlon if you don't like it. I mean, it was his first big scene, and you know, even though he is such a great man, he's nervous about playing the role, and maybe he didn't quite have the energy that he would have. Let me go shoot it again. And they said, no, that's all right. And I knew that was another sign that I was going to be fired, because I knew they didn't like it. And if they were telling me not to go up, we were just shooting downstairs. We could have just shot up there and done it again in like a day. That they must have planned, well, let the new director do it. So on that Wednesday, hearing the rumors that I was going to be fired, I myself fired 4 of who, in my opinion, were the traitors in my midst. It was sort of like The Godfather. I fired the assistant director. I fired a number of people as a preemptory strike on that Wednesday. And it threw Paramount and everybody in a total dither, because, you know, they were going to fire me that weekend. And here I had gone and fired 3-4 people, and I went right upstairs and I reshot the scene with Marlon Brando a second time. And the footage that you're seeing in the picture is the second shoot. I've often been very curious to go look at the footage from the first shoot and see if it was really all that bad. I think it probably was pretty good, and he was playing older, maybe more playing the age, because Marlon was not a very old man when he played this part, and we were very concerned to have him be able to be Jimmy Cahn's father and what have you. So I think what was confused for the age we were working for was confused by the executives as a lack of vitality, and they sent the rushes over to Charlie Bluthorn, who was the big boss, and he agreed. And it didn't hurt that around this time I won the Oscar for Patton, and I think I just squeaked by, and they didn't fire me that weekend, and the people who were agitating for me to be fired, I had fired. So I would say that I survived. This is about the 3rd week of The Godfather that all this happened and this scene was shot. Now, this scene in front of the best company in the snow was the first shot of The Godfather. It's the first scene of the first day. And Al and Diane coming out of the shopping was shot in the morning, and then that afternoon we went over to Polk's toy store and we shot Bobby Duvall buying a sled at a toy store, and that was day one. I'll always remember, because when I saw the rushes of what Gordy Willis's photography looked like from that scene on the first day, I was so moved. It had such a beautiful feel of the period in the 40s, and I was so pleased with the first day. I always feel it was very ironic that the first and second day went very well, and the third and fourth day was the famous scene where Al killed Sollozzo in the Italian restaurant, and the fifth day was the exterior of the hospital where McCluskey, the corrupt police officer, punches Al. And that was the first 5 days of the first week. So we had shot all that material, including probably the best scene in the picture. And yet even after that week, I was in big trouble, partly because Al had twisted his ankle jumping on a running board of a car in the scene in the hospital. And so he had to go off to the hospital, and I didn't get to finish it because I lost the actor. And they made a big stink of how my first week was embarrassing and stuff. But the first week, if the records be checked, the first day was in Best Company, Polk's toy store, and I have to remember what the second day was, but the third and fourth day was the Sollozzo murder in the restaurant scene that I'm pretty proud of, and that was all the first week.
Luca, I'm Bruno Tartaglia.
I know.
Il bicchiere di scotch. Pre-war.
Ain't no big.
You know who I am?
The Sollozzo Luca Brasi sequence was shot in a real interior in a hotel in New York. It was an Art Deco decor, as you see here. We did very little to it. We shot The Godfather in a combination of sets inside a studio as well as some real locations, different businesses in Little Italy or hotels, Hotel Edison, I remember.
$50,000 da principio.
Big.
Me ne accorgo. Va bene.
I still have that cigarette lighter, actually, I must say. I bought that from the production. This idea to have Tartaglia stab his hand on the bar, I think was Al Lettieri's. I was very interested in this garroting. I wanted his face to actually turn black in front of the camera. And the way we did that is we put some special makeup that when a fine mist of water is sprayed on it, it would look as though the face was turning black from suffocation. I don't know if it worked, but it was very elaborate. We put the special makeup and we sprayed water while they were strangling him. So this scene now with Bobby Duvall coming out of the toy store was shot in the afternoon of the first day, after we had shot Al and Kay coming out of shopping at Best & Company.
Get in the car. What are you worried about? If I wanted to kill you, you'd be dead already. Get it.
An interesting note is that we had the discipline in shooting the film that the camera was going to be very classical. It was always about 4.5 feet off the ground. It never was looking up at anyone or looking down unless the guy was on the street or you had to look down. And in the scene where he's shot, I had a high angle from the window as Marlon is shot, and Gordon Willis was very upset. He said, "Why do you want to do this?" And I said, "Well, I think you'll see the oranges when they spill out better that way." And he said, "Well, whose point of view is it?" Gordon was a real purist. I said, "Well, I don't know. It's my point of view. It's Orson Welles' point of view. You know, you can have camera angles like that." And I learned a lot from Gordon. Gordon's concept of structure was very disciplined, and I learned that from him, and I'll always be grateful. I mention the shot of the oranges because whenever I see it, I always think of Gordon. I'm a little embarrassed because I cut that sequence myself too, and I deliberately put the oranges spilling out because I liked it, and no other reason than I liked it. Of course, the second brother was played by John Casale, a wonderful, wonderful actor and a wonderful person. I had the opportunity to work with Johnny 3 times in total, the first Godfather, The Conversation, and the second Godfather. He was a wonderful person and someone I miss very much. He was very, very good in the Godfather and really rounded off the cast of the 3 brothers so well. Now, when Michael and Kay come out of the Radio City Music Hall, I had this idea that she would have noticed a headline in a newsstand that they passed. And, of course, there was no newsstand out there, really. And then I wanted Al to run across the street and get into a phone booth. And, of course, there was no phone booth, really, there across the street. So we came and we brought the newsstand and we brought the phone booth and put it. A little note that's amusing is that all these inserts of the newspapers and Vito, Corleone, Fredo were all shot by George Lucas, who was working with me in those days and helping me finish up the picture. It was funny how, for a moment I was stumped and I said, gee, I wish there was a phone booth right outside the Radio City Musical. He could run across the street and make the call, and it didn't even dawn on me that all we had to do is bring one and dump it there. And they said, oh, no problem, we'll have a phone booth for you there. And every time I see this scene, I think of how I wanted there to be a phone booth, and I was so furious that there wasn't one, and how easy it was really to solve that.
Didn't Tom tell you I called?
Look, come home, kid. You should be with Mama. You hear?
All right.
Of course, the suspense in this part of the movie is totally from the book, and although we tried to give it little details, the children being disturbed by the noise, Sonny being smart enough to write the time that the phone call came in, all of these were details we added. But essentially, in this part of the movie, the dynamism of the book is taking over. What made that book a page turner is now invested in the movie.
Take it easy. Take it easy. Where was Paulie?
Richard Castellano played Clemenza. He was a very bright guy and another wonderful cast member. He had been around a long time in theater and was very imaginative and a little bit of a handful, but made a tremendous contribution to The Godfather, and it was always a source of great unhappiness to me that we could never make a deal with him to be in The Godfather Part 2. The reason was not money. The reason had to do with he wanted a clause in his contract that enabled his associate to write his dialogue for him, and I tried to explain to him. I said, Richie, how can I have someone else write the dialogue, for a movie that I'm making? And he held out for it, right up until the last minute. And then on the day that we were shooting, Michael Vigazzo appears with a black band on his shoulder, and they say, oh, sorry to hear about Clemenza passing away. And I basically wrote myself out of a big pickle. There were many times on The Godfather where things like that happened, and I was forced to basically write myself out of a problem and invent a character or invent a situation to cover the fact that basically an actor wouldn't agree, or in the case of Marlon, we thought he was going to be in the second film, and the last minute he decided not to be.
Sonny was hot for my deal, wasn't he?
And you knew it was the right thing to do.
Sonny will come after you with everything he's got.
This scene was shot in an abandoned diner in New York. It was in Manhattan. It's actually the same interior from the exterior in the snow scene. I remember that the night we shot this, it was really starting to storm, and we were worried of whether or not we could even get it because the power was going to get blown out and the wind was so high. And of course, I love to shoot in weather. I'm always, when they tell me there's going to be a huge storm or a typhoon, I always say, well, let's shoot, because that's like special effects for free. And scenes always play very well if they're set in weather or rain. I've been doing that all my career. I remember on my film You're a Big Boy Now, we had this big scene where Rip Torn and Peter Kastner, the star of that film, were supposed to be outside, and it was pouring rain, and I just shot it in the rain and had them hold umbrellas while they were playing golf. So in my movies, you'll always see if there's weather, you'll always see that we're shooting in it, and usually it's in fact really happening. You can tell from this scene that there's a storm from the exterior. When they go outside, you'll see snow and it really blowing, and that's all real. It's not special effects.
You can go. I don't like violence, Tom. I'm a businessman. Blood is a big expense.
Actually, the storm doesn't look anywhere near as bad on film as it did there. It was howling wind, and they almost wanted to. In fact, I think the production wanted to stop and wanted me to stop shooting and said, oh, it was storm, we're snowed out, we'll get insurance. And I said, well, let's just shoot it in the storm. But when I see the scene, it doesn't look all that bad, but it was pretty bad.
It's bad luck for me, and bad luck for you if you don't make that deal.
In reading The Godfather, the original book had a big part of the story was about a girl who had required an operation because her private parts were too big. And you can't believe, if you read the book, how many pages are devoted to this subplot. And when I first read the book, I couldn't believe it. I said, my God, I don't want to make this book with this. It was sort of like a sensational paperback or something, and then a doctor who cures her becomes her lover. But it was only when I read the book really and analyzed it that I understood that in all that other material was this wonderful suspenseful story of a man and his three sons and his position as a head of, it could have been a company, or and it was what I pulled out of that made the screenplay of The Godfather, and so much of the book is left, in the book.
Just to avoid a long, destructive war. This is almost 1946. Nobody wants bloodshed anymore. If your father dies, you make the deal, Sonny.
That's easy for you to say, Tom. He's not your father.
I was as much a son to him as you or Mike.
What is it?
Hey, Paulie, I thought I told you to stay put.
Well, the guy at the gates, they said they got a package.
Yeah? Oh, hey, Tess, you go see what it is.
You want me to hang around?
Yeah, hang around. You all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah? Some food in the icebox. You hungry or anything?
No, it's all right.
How
Thanks.
about a drink? How about a little brandy? That's good to sweat it out. Huh?
All right, sure.
Go ahead, baby.
That might be a good idea.
Yeah, right.
I want you to take care of that son of a bitch right away.
Paulie sold out the old man, that Strutz.
I don't want to see him again. Make that first thing on your list, understand?
Understood.
Hey, Mickey, tomorrow, You get a couple of guys, you go over to Luca's apartment, hang around, wait for him to show up.
Maybe we shouldn't get Mike mixed up in this too directly.
Listen, hang around the house on the phone and be a big help, huh? Try Luca again. Go ahead. What the hell is this?
That's a Sicilian message. It means Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes.
That's, by the way, Augie and Francie going down, me and my brother down in that little car in this house. This is the kind of neighborhoods our relatives lived in, and we always joked about those two kids being Augie and Francie.
Don't forget the cannoli.
Yeah.
Rocco, sit on the other side. You blocked the rearview mirror.
That Sonny's running wild. He's thinking of going to the mattresses already. We gotta find a spot over on the west side. You try 309 West 43rd Street. You know any good spots on the west side?
I thought it was very intriguing that at the end of the Second World War, of course, they hadn't made cars during World War II, and they delivered a lot of cars with wooden bumpers, and the idea was you'd get the chromium bumper a little later. So in the car in Clemenza's garage, that was the case.
Hey, Paulie, I want you to go down 39th Street, Cala Santos. You pick up 18 mattresses for the guys to sleep while you bring me the bill.
Yeah, all right, that must be...
These were obviously stock footages moving through New York of that period.
Clean. They told me to exterminate them.
Exterminate? That's a bad word to use. Exterminate. Get this guy. See how we don't exterminate you.
He's funny or what?
Hey, Paulie.
The line, the famous line, I had said to Ardell Sheridan, who played Richie Castellano's wife, I said, oh, when he leaves, I said, you know, say a line like, don't forget to bring some cannoli, because my father always used to bring home a box of cannoli. Sometimes it was a real treat. So she said the line, she said, oh, bring home some cannoli. And then in the scene at the end, Richie improvised the famous line, you know, drop the gun, bring the cannoli, off of that earlier reference. But I do believe it was Richie's improvisation, that famous line.
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
Of course, the cars have that A coupon is the gas rationing from World War II. One of the reasons why I loved so much that it was a period setting in a period is that we could do all of the detail to really try to bring back that period. We did a lot of research, and the film was very authentic from that standpoint. The production designer, Dean Tavalaris, and his team worked very hard. Now, this scene is interesting in terms of how it was to collaborate with Mario Puzo. In the script, and in this case I wrote the script and then Mario kind of rewrote it with me, giving me notes in the script, and I wanted to really get an entire recipe in here so people could learn how to make tomato sauce. So in my script, the line was, Clemenza says, well, first you put in the olive oil and some garlic, and then you brown some sausage. And when the script came back to me, Mario had crossed out the line, brown some sausage, and said, and then you fry some sausage. And he said, gangsters don't brown, gangsters fry.
You see? You start out with a little bit of oil, and you fry some garlic. Then you throw in some tomatoes, some tomato paste, you fry it, you make sure it doesn't stick.
At this point in my career, I thought that all of my films should have a good recipe, and at least if the film didn't turn out so well, there'd always be a useful recipe in the film. The way Richie does it is not 100% authentic, but but it is true. In a meat sauce you make with sausage, you do put red wine in after you've fried the sausage, and it's all hot. Then you add the red wine, and it sizzles, and it gives it that nice aroma.
No, I'm just going to the hospital.
Never mind.
To see
Send
Pop.
somebody with him.
Oh, he'll be all right. Sollozzo knows he's a civilian.
Be careful, huh? Yes, sir. Send somebody with him anyway.
I go with you?
I had asked Al and Diane to actually have dinner in this hotel room so they would get to know each other, and I set it up in a very romantic way so that they would, I said, order anything you want and have room service and stuff. And to be honest, I think because of the setting, I like to think Cupid-like, that I made the setting so nice that they actually fell in love and became a couple for a very long time. And I do believe that this scene was the genesis of that. I know that she always liked him so much, and even early on when they were having me cast or shoot screen tests for so many people to cast for Michael, I would go to her and say, what do you think of all this? Who do you think should play him? And she looked at me and said, it should be Al. Now this is the scene shot on the Friday of the first week that really almost was my finish. Things had gone very well the first week, I thought, and on the Thursday before this night we had shot the killing of Sollozzo, and this was to be Al arriving at the hospital. It was a real location. I'll explain why it was my nemesis when that scene comes up, but he wanders through the empty... This was not shot the first week. This was an interior, so we shot this later. But this was a real location. An interesting thing about this scene is that in building the suspense, I wished that I had just some shots of like empty corridors so I could play the sound of footsteps coming and build a suspense. But I was so rushed and so frightened of not getting the scene in time that I focused just on getting the real hardcore scenes, the meat, so to speak, of Al in the corridors, and I didn't shoot any shots of just the empty corridors. And so my friend George Lucas went through the footage and he said, well, you gotta have, to build suspense, you gotta have some empty corridors. And so what we did is we looked through all the shots, and after I had said cut, there would be maybe a few feet of just empty corridor, and we took those. And you'll see later in the sequence when you cut to an empty corridor, those are just the little ends of shots that happened to be, after the actor walked out of the frame, there was a little piece. So advice to directors, very often the most important stuff that you get, you'll shoot and then you'll wish you had gotten the so-called easy unimportant things. So always get those unimportant things because they're as valuable as the important things.
Father just had too many visitors. They interfered with hospital service. The police made them leave about 10
In this scene, Al, I thought, demonstrated really now this boy being a born leader and kind of, he arrives in a situation, he remains cool. He immediately becomes decisive and takes over. And Al showed this very well. I think the studio started to realize that Al had this extraordinary range and ability to be a leader.
I'm sorry, but you will have to leave.
You and I are gonna move my father to another room. Now, can you disconnect those two so we can move the bed out?
That's out of the question.
You know my father. Men are coming here to kill him. You understand? Now help me, please.
Here's a shot that was just a leftover, this one as well. These were just little pieces left over from the ends of shots that we were able to use to heighten suspense, and George Lucas helped me find them and do this.
Who are you? I am Enzo, the baker.
So the story of why I got in trouble on the fifth night outside the hospital was we were pretty much on schedule that week. Those first 4 days had gotten everything we needed. But in the night scene, not only did it take a long time to light it because it was night in this hospital exterior, but in the course of the evening, Al twisted his ankle, and they took him off to have it x-rayed and what have you. And somehow I got the blame for this. I mean, I got the blame that I hadn't completed the Friday's work. In fact, that hospital sequence that I was supposed to shoot that Friday, we ultimately went to L.A., and later after the movie, again, in that second unit, we shot that on the lot. And I'll try to, when I see the sequence, show you which were the original locations where we were not able to finish, and then which were the ones that were done on a Hollywood lot with a different photographer, by the way, trying to match. Now, this is in Hollywood, the shot of Enzo and Michael coming out. This is all in L.A., the closer shots, waiting for the assailants and trying to look as though they were bodyguards, look like they have guns. I believe this is the original, that long shot was the original New York location. This is in L.A., the fake one. This was in New York, I believe. I may be wrong, even I don't know anymore. Obviously, what we were trying to show here, that Al, as a war veteran, was able to stand up to this kind of tension and not have his nerves go. And he even notices himself when he lights the cigarette how that his hand is not shaking, whereas this young baker is. In a film, you're always trying to figure out ways to show what the characters are feeling or what the characters are thinking, and you're always looking for little external bits of business.
I thought I got all you guinea hoods locked up. What the hell are you doing here?
What happened to the men who were guarding my father, Captain?
Why, you little punk.
That actor along who has the lines in the background there is Sonny Grasso, who was one of the real fellows from the French Connection that story is written about.
Phil, take him in.
Kid's clean, Captain. He's a war hero. He's never been...
God damn it, I said take him in.
What's the Turk paying you to set up my father, Captain?
Take a hold of him. Stand him up. Stand him up straight.
There you'll notice the wooden bumper on the car because they delivered those cars without their original bumpers.
Attorney for the Corleone family. These men are private detectives.
This is back in L.A.
Vito Corleone. They're licensed to carry firearms. If you interfere, you'll have to appear before a judge in the morning and show cause.
All right, let him go. Come on.
So the mall in Staten Island was actually several houses in a residential area, and Tavaleras had built these artificial stone walls and that gate to kind of imply that there was a compound. It was really inspired, I think, in in Mario's book by the notion of the Kennedy compound, a very powerful family with a real patriarch with all these fine sons.
Jesus Christ.
We had a very good makeup artist on the film, Dick Smith, and he, we really wired Al's jaw. I tried to make the notion of his suffering from a real punch from a strong man. And, normally people get punched in movies and, it's like the next day they're just talking. And we really asked medical help as to what it would be like. And we temporarily wired his jaw so he couldn't talk and tried to be as realistic as we possibly could.
The Turk, he wants to talk. Gosh, imagine the nerve on this son of a bitch, eh?
Craps out last night. He wants a meeting today. What'd he say?
What did he say? He wants to...
Jimmy Caan really spent time and went around meeting sort of tough guys around New York and the issue of we were making this film that had to do with the mafia. Mario told me, he says, you're going to be offered to meet real guys, and you know what? Don't meet them. Don't even, say you're interested. Don't let them have your phone number, and they'll never bother you. And that's what I did, and I was never certainly bothered, and I made the film. I never had a point of contact with any real figures in the underworld. Jimmy, on the other hand, really... kind of hung out with some real people and tried to learn from them and pick up their inflections and the way they express themselves and really, brought that to his performance in a very authentic way.
He is invulnerable. Now, nobody has ever gunned down a New York police captain, never. It would be disastrous. All the 5 families would come after you, Sonny. The Corleone family would be outcast. Even the old man's political protection would run for cover.
In a scene like this, I had the benefit of these wonderful actors who really enjoyed working with each other, and in a full-out dialogue scene, kind of that had a great turning point as Al suddenly, from being the dopey kid brother, starts to strategize and offer a solution to their predicament. And I remember I felt that this was a very important turning point for him. And so as he began to lay out his idea of how he himself would go and kill the Sollozzo as well as the crooked police captain, as this moment happened, I remember that I wanted the camera to move in closer to him. Generally, this was not something that Gordon liked to do. As I said, Gordon was really a purist. He liked to kind of deal with rock-steady shots, no tricky business, no funny business. But, once in a while I could make the case that this would emphasize what was going on. And it was a touch-and-go relationship with Gordon on the first picture. I don't think he had a lot of... he didn't know who I was. I was some kid, and he had very... firm ideas about structure and how things should be done. And on the second picture, the second Godfather picture, I think it was much more mutually harmonious and respectful. But, in the first film, I was not really, the crew didn't kind of understand what I was doing there, why I was chosen to be the director. And I the crew, these kind of New York somewhat know-it-all guys made me feel like the jocks in college or something. So I felt very much like an outsider and, tended to take more the part of the actors and be more involved with the actors. And I remember once I was sitting in the bathroom of the stage where we were shooting, and I was, hidden in the toilet, and 2 guys walked in, and I could hear them saying, "Wow, what do you think of this director? Boy, he doesn't know anything, what an asshole he is," and stuff. And I felt so embarrassed, I almost wanted to lift my shoes up so that they couldn't tell who it was that was in there. They were talking about me, but I was very unhappy during The Godfather. I had been told by everyone that my ideas for it were so bad, and I didn't have a hell of a lot of confidence in myself. I was only about 30 years old or so, and I was just hanging on by my wits and my I don't know what, but I had no indication that this nightmare was going to turn into a successful film, much less a film that was to become a classic. So I always feel for young people working, is that to remember that those times when you feel that your ideas aren't good, or people are putting down your ideas, or you're getting fired, that those are the same ideas that you're going to be celebrated for 30 years later. So, you almost have to have courage.
They're going to be staring at your face, Mike. So walk out of the place real fast, but you don't run. Don't look nobody directly in the eye, but you don't look away either. Hey, they're going to be scared stiff of you, believe me, so don't worry about nothing. You're going to turn out all right. You take a long vacation, nobody knows where, and we're going to catch the hell.
How bad do you think it's going to be?
Pretty goddamn bad. Probably all the other families will line up against us.
I think we shot this really in a basement. I don't think this was a set. I think we just kind of did up some basement so that it would be convenient, so that we wouldn't lose time in having to go to some other place.
Never let them get away with that. They was just asking for big trouble. Mike, we was all proud of you, being a hero, Your father, too.
This scene is a particular memory of my family. My father liked Chinese food, and I always remember what it looked like in the really white containers, not the ones today that have the little red pagoda on them. It's funny how you become obsessed in little details, especially when you're feeling a little insecure, that the details and having the right Chinese containers and the right takeout coffee cup, which is not like the styrofoam cup is of today, that almost those details are something you can latch on to and feel at least you're being authentic when you're insecure about, what the bigger picture is that you're doing.
Sollozzo lose our ass going around the block.
What about the negotiator? He's over my place playing pinochle with a couple of my men. He's happy. They're letting him win.
I think the actors worked so well together because of a rehearsal period that we had before the movie started. I remember I'm a big believer in all my films. I always try to have a couple of weeks that get all the cast together, and very often if the first time the actors work together, they do so in improvisation, especially sensual improvisation, eating together or preparing food together, or doing some activity that you touch and making something together. And for The Godfather, what I did in Patsy's restaurant uptown, they had a back room. And before really the cast knew each other, I arranged to have a family-style table put in that back room, and I had all this Italian food made. And I remember Marlon was sitting at the head of the table, and to his right was Al, and to his left was Jimmy, and then to Jimmy's left was Bobby Duvall. My sister Talia, as the girl in the family often would, as I remembered it, was bringing the platters of food, and I just told them to, have an improvisation as a family and just, talk while eating, pass me the sausage or what have you. And I very much believe that it was in that first improvisation that they established what it was like for them to be a family. And of course, the young actors held Marlon in such esteem that in their own way they were trying to either show off for him, as Jimmy was, or to impress Marlon with their moodiness, as Al was, or Bobby Duvall was constantly doing Marlon Brando imitations every time Marlon looked away, and Tally was, thrilled to be part of that group and as the little sister. And I always have felt that improv and other things we did afterwards, but primarily that, really gave them something fundamental that helped them throughout every scene that was to come, and made it believable that they really were brothers or father and son, or all the relationships that the story of this family was to be.
A message to that girlfriend when I think the time is right.
They were also really lots of fun. I mean, they were always joking. Marlon is a big jokester. He was always doing practical jokes, and in this movie they were like kids. I mean, they were always mooning each other and outdoing each other with jokes, and even in some of the scenes, as I said, that Marlon had this big sign on his forehead when Lenny Montana was trying to do his scene, and there's a scene coming up that I'll tell you, a practical joke that Marlon pulled. The scenes in the cars of this movie were all shot what we call poor man's process. In other words, they're really just in a car in an empty stage and a couple of lights on strings very often behind them to look like headlights of another car, but in fact there's nothing but a car being shaken and just an illusion of being in the car when in fact they're just sitting in a still car in an empty stage. Gordon was very good at that. It's quite a good illusion. Of course, once I say what it is, then it spoils it.
I gotta frisk you, so turn around now. On your knees, facing me.
Sterling Hayden was a very unusual man. I can't say that I got to know him at all well, and he was very mysterious to me, but he certainly played this character well.
Going to Jersey?
Maybe.
We went out at night to shoot this bridge stuff and try to get the car to jump the divider and go the opposite direction. So pretty much this is a combination of these poor man process shots and some second unit.
Nice work, Lou.
This was a wonderful location, this restaurant. I can't remember where it was, but it was in fact right near the elevator train. So the L train that becomes so important psychologically in the scene was actually there, and is what suggested the idea. This is now probably the Wednesday and Thursday of the first week. So this Sollozzo murder, I've heard it said, years after the fact, people talk about how The Godfather got made, and Paramount never denied that I was on the outs with them. They were going to fire me, but they said that it was sort of justified because my first week, wasn't as strong as it should be, and it always flies in the face for me of the fact that this scene, the Sollozzo murder, was shot on that Wednesday and Thursday of that first week, and it's probably one of the best scenes in the picture, and certainly a scene in which Al really rivets you with his intensity and his concentration. And I always think, well, couldn't you see it, fellas? It was right there in front of you. I loved the fact that Al Lettieri could really speak Sicilian, and I thought he was such a strong villain for Michael to play against. As you know, I mean, the villain very often is a good villain can bring the hero out so well, and I think Al Lettieri's performance in this scene, so complemented what Al was doing. I'm looking at the shot and laughing to myself because I'm sure Gordy Willis was annoyed that I had that camera so high, and I'm sure that I had the camera so high to see the floor, because we had stripped the floor. Dean Tavoleris wanted to show that original floor, and there was some linoleum over it, so we spent the money to take the linoleum off of it and show that floor, and I know I put the camera up high so you could see it, and I know that probably Gordon didn't like it.
Said I have a guarantee. No more attempts on my father's life.
What guarantees can I give you, Mike? I am the hunted one. I missed my chance. You think too much of me, kid. I'm not that clever. All I want is a truce.
I have to go to the bathroom. Is that all right?
You gotta go, you gotta go. I frisked him. He's clean.
Don't take too long.
I frisked 1,000 young folks.
This was the actual bathroom in that restaurant. But we may have put that wooden unit with the chain, because I know that Clemenza describes it as being, a old-fashioned toilet with the chain thing, and I'm not sure. We shot it actually in the restaurant on those 2 days, the Wednesday and Thursday I speak of. But maybe the art department, I'm sure the art department put it there for me. I look at this scene as the scene that really probably saved me in terms of remaining on the picture, and certainly it won a lot of admiration for Al, who was very much questioned by the executives. But I think in this scene, Al really showed his stuff, and the scene itself showed that, there was something to what we were doing after all.
Senti me. Nicolozzi, tu mi capisci, no? Sei italiano come tuo padre? Tuo padre sta male.
I know Walter Murch, the editor and sound, although he was not an editor at this point, he was more in sound. I think The Conversation was the first film Walter edited, but I know Walter contributed to some of the sound work that's going on here and how the elevated train worked. We tried to make the violence in The Godfather very detailed, very specific, how the bullet really hit. We worked very hard to make the hits look realistic and not just sloppy. It was a wonderful effects man by the name of A.D. Flowers that worked with us on this and did many ingenious devices that enabled us to do this. In this sequence, when there's the mafia families go to the mattress as they speak, this is a piano piece written by my father called This Loneliness, which I always loved, and I had him play it and made this little montage. As I said, George Lucas helped me shoot this material. And there is my father playing the piano. It was fun. I strapped a revolver on his shoulder, and there he is. And that fellow listening to him was a cab driver I met, and put him in the picture just as an extra in the scene. But in Godfather 2, he had a big role. These are real pictures, of course, of actual gang assassinations. Those are my father's hands, his ruby ring, which I have to this day. As I said, Marlon Brando was always playing practical jokes on everybody. And in this sequence, there's going to be a place where some guys are supposed to carry him up in a stretcher up the stairs. And these guys were, very macho guys and very sure of themselves. And what no one knew was that Marlon had them take a bunch of lead weights, like 200 pounds of lead weights, and put them in the stretcher that he was lying in. So the thing weighed 600 pounds with Marlon in it. And these guys who were supposed to schlep the thing up the stairs were absolutely, so sure that they could do it. I said, well, you sure you can get it up with him in it? Oh, no problem, Mr. Coppola, no problem. And so they struggled to get this thing up the stairs, and it was really heavy. I should explain a little bit of how Marlon Brando came to be cast in this movie. We had exhausted the possibilities of who could play this very powerful and charismatic man as described in the book. And I remember talking to the casting collaborator, Fred Roos, and we said, well, who's the greatest actor in the world? And we concluded, well, maybe it's Laurence Olivier and Marlon Brando. So we said, well, what about Laurence Olivier and Marlon Brando? I said, well, Laurence Olivier is great. He's the right age. He almost looks like Vito Genovese, but of course he's English. And Marlon Brando, he's a great actor, but he's like a man in his late 40s. I mean, he wasn't very old. So we did a little legwork, and Marlon had just been in a movie called Quemada, actually a very good movie. But it had not done any big box office, and it was considered not only a failure commercially, but almost as though that Marlon was box office poison. In other words, if he was in a movie, fewer people would go see it than if he wasn't in the movie, which is a very strange thing to consider. It was also considered, a bit troublesome and difficult on the production. Anyway, those were rumors. Laurence Olivier was reputed to be a little ill. I checked with the agent, and I heard that he was quite ill and that they didn't think he could possibly be considered. So I focused on the idea of Marlon. I said, well, gee, if Marlon Brando does this, it could be like a great performance. He'll make himself older. He'll turn himself into some kind of a Italian person just through his talent and his great genius. So when I mentioned it to Mario Puzo, Mario said, well, Marlon Brando was the first guy he thought of. But the idea of Marlon Brando as Vito Corleone sank like a lead balloon. I remember in one meeting I was told by the then president of Paramount, said to me, as president of Paramount Pictures, I am telling you that Marlon Brando will not appear in this motion picture. So I continued talking and arguing, and finally they agreed to let me discuss the idea of Marlon Brando being in the movie if I honored three stipulations. A, he would do a screen test. B, he would do the film for free. And C, he would put up a bond so that if any of his shenanigans or any trouble came from him being on the set, that it would guarantee the losses. So I said, okay. I accept, what could I do? I accepted these three things for Marlon. So I then called up Marlon Brando and suggested maybe it'd be nice if I did like a little makeup test or something. I could come over your house and, he said to me, all right. So I got some of my friends from San Francisco, and I had heard that Marlon Brando does not like loud noises. That's why he wears earplugs often. He doesn't like all that loud shouting on the set and everything. So I said to the fellas who were going to go with me and shoot this supposed screen test, which was in Marlon's mind a little makeup test. Said, let's just go and no one talk ever. We'll just kind of make gestures. And we got to his house very early, and we set up our little lights. And I had brought a bunch of provolone cheese and little Italian cigars and little like props, and just to kind of put around. So I set up, and we were very quiet. Sure enough, he wakes up and he comes out of his bedroom, and he's this great looking, I don't know, he must have been 47, and in a Japanese robe. He looked very impressive, and I looked at him with this ponytail and said, my God, how's he ever going to play a mafia chieftain? It was funny. I hardly talked. I kind of gestured and indicated that I had a camera. No one spoke. It was totally silent. And he walked out and he put on a jacket and he started mumbling, Remember, he went through great effort to bend the tip of his collar, and he said, those Italian guys always have the collar bent like that. And he picked up a cigar and he started to gesture with it and use it as a prop, and he nibbled on a little bit of provolone cheese, and he just started to gesture, and he rolled up the ponytail and he kind of pinned it up, and he took some shoe polish and he darkened it. And while he's doing this, we're photographing. The phone rang while he was doing this, and he picked up the phone and without talking, just sort of going like that. I always wondered what the person on the other line must have thought. Then he took some tissue paper and he said, he should have the face of a bulldog, he said. And he stuffed the tissue paper in his jaw. And then he said, well, if he's shot in the throat, he ought to have a talk like that a little bit. It really was a transformation of this nice-looking young man with a blonde ponytail into this kind of mafia guy. So I felt that was very interesting, what I had. And I took it to New York, and I went to Mr. Bluthorn's office. And I said, oh, Charlie, I want to show you something. He was always nice to me. He says, yeah. So as he walks out, I flick the video, and sure enough, there's Marlon Brando coming out in a robe with a blonde ponytail. And he looks and he says, never. Marlon Brando, never. And as he's doing that, he's watching Brando turn himself into this guy. And Charlie just looks astounded, and he says, that's incredible. That's incredible. And once he was sold on the idea that Marlon could do it on his authority, they allowed us to do it. Of course, the other thing about putting up a bond and stuff got forgotten, as I hoped it would. But they didn't really pay him very much because, his status, I guess they felt didn't warrant it. And Marlon was always justifiably annoyed about that. And I think that was the reason what negotiations were going on late in the day on Godfather 2 when Paramount never really secured that he do it.
Corleone.
This sequence of Michael walking with the two shepherds, when I read the book, The Godfather, I saw Al Pacino walking with those two shepherds, and I saw that face, specifically in this scene. And no matter what they told me, no matter how much they browbeat me to have other people, Bob Evans wanted me to consider Redford. He wanted me to consider Ryan O'Neal, both of whom are wonderful actors. But, I always saw this face of Al Pacino in the Sicily section. And they would say to me, well, there are blonde Sicilians, and it's very true there are blonde and redheaded Sicilians, without a doubt. But I always wanted the face of this young man, who was going to go into legitimate life, who was going to go to college and maybe be a lawyer or something. I always wanted his face to be like his brand, that he was really not only Sicilian, but Sicilian of the old ways. In reading the book, it was his face that I saw, and that's why I was so persistent.
Mamma mia, io sono cascato innamorato.
Ma vado su per la montagna.
Oh, e che sei rimasto colpito da un fulmine?
Michele, lascia perdere. In Sicilia le femmine sono come la lupara.
Of course, for Sicily, we actually went to Sicily. We didn't go for a long time, but that was another controversial move that, Francis wants to really go to Sicily. Can't he shoot it somewhere else? These actors who played the shepherd were wonderful. One is Franco Citti, who was in many of the films of Pasolini, and the other is Angelo Infanti, who's been in a million films and was really kind of the Italian equivalent of Jimmy Caan, a real wonderful character and full of jokes and just like Jimmy.
In questo paese ci sono belle ragazze, ma virtuose, eh? Sì, ma chi sta teneva un vestito magari color prugna? E magari un più contesta color prugna.
You know, Al couldn't speak Italian really at all, so here we have a scene in which he's supposed to say all this stuff to the keeper of the inn in Italian. Wonderful actor, the father named Saro Uzzi. I didn't know what to do because, I mean, Al couldn't possibly learn all this in Italian, and there was going to be a big speech where he proposes that he's going to come and pay court to the girl. And so I just, at the last minute, hit upon the idea that Al would speak in English and have Angelo translate for him, and that way I wouldn't have to have all the subtitles.
Sentite. Che volete ancora davanti a me? Dai, ma è parente che dite a noi. Venite che poi comprendo. Fabrizio.
There was something kind of regal about Al speaking in English, a foreign language, almost like he was a young prince. But really, although it has a dramatic purpose, you now know the real reason was Al couldn't speak Italian, and I didn't want to have a lot of subtitles on the screen. It works good having the scene be translated.
Hiding in Sicily.
This is a very formal transaction going on here, because if the word gets out that there's this young man who speaks English, there are obviously people who are searching for him. When the father realizes that there's about to be a kind of formal statement made, I thought it was funny. I had him straighten out his suspenders as though that's how you receive, this now official business that's about to transact. Yeah, when the father now makes the response to this, he does so by first adjusting his suspenders as though now he can make an official. Of course, it's wonderful, the formality by which a courtship is arranged, and I took great pleasure in being able to do that in detail. These Sicilian locations actually were visited on each picture when we made The Godfather 2 and The Last Godfather. We actually went back to each of those places again, and if you see the pictures, you'll see a continuity of them over and over again. Interesting thing about the love theme from this movie, it's very famous now, but the composer was having a terrible time coming up with something. I had wanted a theme that was a little almost African, that had, a little of those kind of da-da-dee-da-da, that kind of Arabic sound to it. And he came up with many, many, many different tunes, and I said, well, it doesn't have that archaic Sicilian, almost African type of sound that I want. And late in the game, I went to Rome to hear the recording session of the music, and Nino Rota met me at the airport. We were going to go to the recording session, and he says, he was a very gentle, wonderful man, and he says, Francis, I have a new one. What do you think of this? And he had the music right as we're walking in the airport, and he went da 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 dee, da 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 da. And I said, that's great, because it had that modal sound that I was looking for. Although it did turn out that he had used that or theme very similar to it in an upbeat tempo, in an earlier comedy that he had written the music for years before. Also, I heard some themes that sound very much like The Godfather to me in Satyricon, which I went to. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with stealing from yourself. This actress, I think her name is Jeannie, in my original take on how the film would be cast, that's how the Don's daughter would look, more a girl like that. I mean, she's still pretty. When my sister originally wanted to play that part, my reaction was that she was too beautiful to play the part, that this was obviously the unattractive daughter of a big shot, and the only reason she was able to marry a handsome young groom was because she was the daughter of Don Corleone. And I thought my sister, Talia, was so beautiful that anybody would want to marry her, irrespective of if she was a big shot's daughter or not. And when she asked to audition for it, I said, but Talia, you're too beautiful. Maybe there'll be some other role. But there was so much trouble with the casting, and I was so unpopular with my choices. And I did test Talia and gave her the chance to shoot the scene, and I heard that Robert Evans liked her. And at the point that I heard this, I was also getting the information that I was going to be fired. I knew there was lots of controversy that they didn't want Al Pacino and that they wanted maybe Jimmy Caan, who was actually my good friend, to play the part of Michael, and it was just like a mess. So I just called my secretary to find out if I should even bother coming in. And what I was told by her was, quote, don't quit, let them fire you. And I knew what that meant. I knew that meant that if I quit, I wouldn't get paid, but if they fired me, I would. And so since I thought I was going to get fired, I said, let's cast Tally, even if she is too beautiful for the part. Let her at least get the part. And of course, I was very wrong. She did wonderfully in the role. She played it beautifully, and her beauty only made her more touching and more moving when she is abused by Carlo, etc. So that only goes to show you that when you think someone in your family is too beautiful to play something, that's the blood tie talking and not really necessarily a good director. The costumes in this film were done really well. They're not like pushy where they're out with flashy stuff, but every actor's wardrobe expresses their character in some way, in some subtle way or not subtle way, but really Johnny Johnson caught the character with the clothes and brought the character out. Again, all of this music for the wedding and these special Sicilian band was all done by my dad. My mother and my father traveled with us on The Godfather, and he would always organize the musicians. Everything was recorded live, and he wrote these various marches and other special dances and mazurkas and things for the film. And if you look carefully in the movie, you can see my mother and my father in many, many different places. This was, by the way, this was Gordon Willis's favorite shot. I remember when we did this shot, he says, finally there's a beautiful shot. I thought there were a lot of beautiful shots, but he liked that one. In this scene, I said to Al, Al, I want you to I want you to dance with the bride, and then I want you to take her in the car. He says, but I can't dance, and I can't drive, and I can't speak Italian. So in this scene, he speaks Italian, and he dances, and then he got in the car, and he just took the brake off, and they rolled down the hill because he couldn't drive. This is Al not being able to dance. Oh, in the scene, he used to drive her off. I see that's not in this. We were looking for a girl to play Apollonia, and we weren't finding one. And I had hoped that Stefania Sandrelli would play her, but for some reason, she wasn't interested in doing it. And we looked and looked and looked, and finally, very, very near the end, they told us that there was a young woman who might be suitable, and I drove to some town where she was shooting, and I met her, and she was a very beautiful young Italian woman, and I wasn't sure. And when she said goodbye and walked away, as she walked away, she sort of skipped like a young girl, and I saw her skip like that, and I thought, well, then she's the one, because there's something girlish about her. And that's how really she got the part. This love scene was shot in the actual villa, so it was a natural interior, a real room in that old villa. The scene where Kay comes with a taxi to the compound and tries to learn about Michael, who of course has just vanished. It seems to me this scene was in and out of the picture a half dozen times. That, you know, we had it in, we took it out, we had it in. I don't remember the reasons, but clearly it showed what was happening on the home front.
Yes, well, I have. I mean, I've tried writing and calling. Now, I want to reach Michael.
Nobody knows where he is. We know that he's all right, but that's all.
What was that?
Well, that's an accident, but nobody was hurt.
Tom?
Hagen was always operating as a lawyer. You know, I remember all his rationale, all his reaction to her trying to give some letters to get to Michael. He was always kind of the brother who was the lawyer.
Come on, I'm sorry, come on.
Now, this scene was shot after news I was given that they didn't feel there was enough action in the movie, and Bob Evans was going to send an action director to the set. So I was very distressed. I didn't want to have another director come while I was working and start directing action. I felt that I could direct action, and I was very nervous. So I called my sister and my son. I had a little boy who was like, I don't know, 9 years old or 10 years old or something, and we went to the set and we worked out as much action as we possibly could think of. You know, we had her break all the dishes and smash the glass, and my little boy, this little 9-year-old boy with his strap, is whipping his aunt with the strap, and I said, okay, and throw the dishes, and Gio, go and get her some more, and smash into the dividing doors, and we just cooked up all this excessive stuff to try to get some action in here so they wouldn't bring in an action director. So here Johnny is really imitating what my little boy was doing. We laid this all out on a Saturday, and then on the Monday we showed it to Johnny, and we did it that way. So when you look at the scene, what you're looking at is a scene made by a director who knew that an action director was arriving unless he got some action in the picture. This is hard to watch, to see your kid sister all beaten up.
now I'll kill you. You guinea brat. Get out here!
I think where my personality had an influence on this picture is just that, of course there was the conspiracy and the men in rooms making plans, as has gone on throughout history. And I think, I love children, and I think in terms of where are the children when this is going on, or, what's the food like when this is going on, or what's the music. And I think that my own preferences or orientations came to combine with what was the central grown-up adult male part of this story, but I was able to include the things that I love as well, and that I think about,
Sonny,
The trap set for Sonny culminates in his massacre at the toll gates, and it's no secret that this scene really was inspired by Arthur Penn and his wonderful movie Bonnie and Clyde. At the end of that film, when Bonnie and Clyde are killed, and I'm a big admirer of Arthur Penn, and as my dad used to say, steal from the best.
Son of a bitch.
Poor Jimmy was wired with hundreds of bullet hits and kind of had to act as though he's being riddled by machine gun bullets, and the car was being riddled by machine gun bullets. It was a great credit to Jimmy that he was able to do this so convincingly. It really is more difficult than you might think, because although these things are going off on you, they don't really hit you with the impact that a machine gun would, so he's got to sort of dance to do that, and yet they are dangerous, because if one is put in the wrong place, it can really hurt. This scene is interesting in illustrating often how certain actors are more comfortable doing their work in the first or second take. Other actors we read about like to get 40 takes to do them. Bobby Duvall is an actor who usually does his best work just like the first few times. He's very full, as they say, and he can be very convincingly moving, and because it's real for him. In this case, we did the scene a few times, and I wanted to do another one, and really he had done perfectly good ones, but it just seemed like that one extra one was so opened up for him, and it was very real, and it was very, very touching what he did.
And now you've had your drink.
They shot Sonny on the causeway. He's dead.
Many people have asked me whether it's difficult to work with great actors like this, and my feeling is so much is in the role itself. If you give a great actor the role that can really utilize what they have, that's half of it. And if you give them a little bit of preparation, give them the opportunity to get comfortable with what they're doing, let them be comfortable with their wardrobe and set the stage, so to speak, then really they're most capable of realizing the characters with the director offering little things like, oh, you know, be louder, be faster, be happier, be sadder. When you deal with actors of the caliber of Robert Duvall and Marlon Brando, you really don't tell them too much. You try to give them a little word that might help them see what the moment is or hide them, but you really don't tell them much. With Marlon Brando, you know, you say, you know, faster, slower, louder, softer, and that's about it.
This is Tom Hagen. I'm calling for Vito Corleone at his request. Now, you owe your Don a service. He has no doubt that you will repay it. Now, he will be at your funeral parlor.
When I read the book, I was always very touched by this Mario Puzo's choice, you know, that this undertaker we met at the beginning who comes with a favor at the wedding, that you know that one day there is going to be something he's asked to do, and he's reluctant to get into this client, what I refer to as a client relationship. It's an old use of the word client, I must say. But, you know, I love the fact that in Mario's book you think, oh my God, he's going to get involved with this mafia chieftain and he's going to ask him to, you know, cover up some murder or do something like that. But when the Don does come to him, it's so great what Mario just has him so to make his son look better so the mother can see him. Nothing dire or incriminating.
Look how they massacred my boy.
I really loved working with the Italian actors. Of course, in The Godfather it was my first experience, and so many of the actors, Angela Infante, Sara Urzi, Corrado Gaipa, who played Michael's benefactor, Franco Citti, Gaston Moschine in Godfather 2, they work in a way very different from what I was used to with American actors. American actors, you sort of suffer with them on the way to the performance, whereas the Italian actors come with something already worked out, and if you don't like what they've worked out, then they'll work out something else.
Sapessi come sono diventata brava a guidare la macchina? Me l'ha insegnato lui. Anzi, guarda, mi ti faccio vedere.
It's funny, for thousands of years, people are always saying young people don't respect anything anymore. I think that never changes. In ancient Rome, they were complaining about the youth and how they weren't behaving and how their music was terrible.
Io ho fatto un piano. Voglio che tu vada in una villa vicino a Siracusa. Ma ci devi andare subito. Subito. Che succede?
I think it's important to note that The Godfather, as conceived originally by Paramount Pictures, was a very economical or inexpensive picture, I should say. It was prepared with the notion of costing about $2.5 million, which is why they hired a young director. I was brought on because I was a young director and was supposedly capable of working in a fast way, you know, without big crews and lots of equipment. Also because I was Italian-American, and they figured that that would kind of bring some texture to the thing. And because I could be pushed around, basically, and bossed around by the studio, which had very, very specific ideas on how they wanted to make the movie. When I came on the show, they had a script that they sort of prepared with Mario Puzo. I should say they sort of, you know, just told him what they wanted. But Mario was such a wonderful man that he was, and thrilled to be connected with a movie, that he was anxious to do it any way they wanted it. So they took the story out of the 40s, which is what it said in his book, and set it in the contemporary time of the time we were making the film, which was in the 70s. So the script I read was, set in the 70s, had hippies in it. It didn't have any of this kind of post-war ambiance that I felt was so important to the story. And not only that, they were planning to make it in Kansas City. The other reason they hired me is because they had seen a little film I made called The Rain People with Jimmy Caan and Shirley Knight, and they felt the performances were good. So the combination of these things got me the job to do this movie. Now, the book at the time that I began wasn't the enormous bestseller that it gradually became. So I was in a very interesting situation in that I was directing a movie from a book that was becoming more and more popular. And as it became more popular, I became more and more inappropriate to be the director. Surely an important book like this could have had Leah Kazan or Arthur Penn or some wonderful established director. And this was happening actually right as I was preparing the movie. So that when I told the studio that I felt it should not be contemporary, it should not have hippies in it, and it should not be shot in St. Louis, but rather it should be shot in New York where it was set, and it ought to be set in the post-war years so that the whole giant theme of America as it emerged from World War II could be part of it in not only in theme, but in terms of the wardrobe and the cars and just the feeling of the 40s. The 40s represented for me a kind of growth of America and our system, our business system, and to a post-war position of importance that sort of paralleled the Corleone family. So I was very anxious to shoot it in period. Now this meant, of course, that the film was going to be more expensive, and this little $2.5 million budget that they had allocated would now have to have period cars and period sets and period wardrobe, and all the extras could not just be drafted off the street as they were, but would have to be dressed, and that I was anxious to choose some wonderful collaborators to do this. I remember the costume designer was a wonderful woman named Johnny Johnston, who had done On the Waterfront, which I admired so much, and I picked as the photographer Gordon Willis, whom I had seen really had only done one film for a friend of mine, and I thought was just so incredibly talented, and I met a number of different production designers and ultimately chose Dean Tavoularis, who had worked on films with Arthur Penn. So I was really assembling a kind of first-class team to make this little $2.5 million movie. And to make things more frustrating, I was choosing actors that the studio really had never heard of. Well, the studio heads at that time, Robert Evans and other executives, absolutely thought I was nuts. And I know that they began to seriously reconsider whether, in fact, I was really suitable for this enormous task. And as I explained, the book was becoming more important as time was going on, and my inappropriateness was becoming more noticed.
For years, I paid my people extra so they wouldn't do that.
I believe we shot this scene in the boardroom of the New York Central Railroad, or
You put up $3,000-$4,000.
I think that's what it was.
We can make $50,000 distributing.
You know, I often think about trilogies or quartets and how tricky it is really to do a series of dramas. I mean, perhaps it's not so difficult to do a series of adventures or, like a James Bond series, but in a real drama, I often think of how the last book of the Alexandria Quartet or The Sea of Fertility by Mishima, how the last book inevitably sort of runs out of juice, and part of it is that in the first couple, the things that really make it unique. I mean, I'm looking at the scene with all these mafia dons, and they're casting them as though they were big businessmen working out a railroad merger or something. But you have so many things that you do in the first movie. And you can maybe do some of them again in a second film or book. But by the time you get to the third or the fourth, you really, either you stand it on its head and totally do something unexpected, which is almost like making another first book. But the conventions of that first movie are already used. I look at this scene with the Mafia Dons, and it's so uniquely The Godfather, but, you can copy it, you can repeat it yourself. I probably did. But this is the first time a scene like this is being done, and that's inevitably why I think that the first of a series of books is always, or the second, is always so fresh and so original.
If he should get shot in the head by a police officer.
I think we were big heroes because we shot this scene in one day and it was scheduled for a little more. We picked up some praise from the studio for doing that. I remember that Marlon was really wonderful that day. He was very prepared, and it's because of him that we were able to get through it so quickly, even impressing the studio, finally getting them a little off my back. And a lot of it was because he really knew how to do this scene. Richard Conti plays Barzini. He's sort of the villain behind the villain as things finally work out. He was a very nice man, very easy to work with, just totally, charming, and I think very effective in the part because of the ease and charm that he had. But of course, Barzini was the real snake in the grass, and part of the Godfather's genius was that he recognized this.
Dan is a pimp. He never could have outfought Santino. But I didn't know until this day that it was Barzini all along.
This scene in New England was an added scene. It wasn't in the script and it wasn't in the film. We shot it in Ross, in Marin, a year later, much later, and again, Gordy Willis didn't photograph it. Bill Butler did, because of the low budget nature of the movie.
Longer than that, I think. It's good to see you, Kay.
I remember Evans used to make fun of Pacino as looking like a rabbi in this scene because of his hat. We were trying to make him look like a businessman.
Very sick.
But you're not like him, Michael. I thought you weren't going to become a man like your father. That's what you told me.
My father's no different than any other powerful man. Any man who's responsible for other people. Like a senator or a president.
You know how naive you sound.
Why?
Senators and presidents don't have men killed.
Oh. Who's being naive, Kay? Kay, my father's way of doing things is over. It's finished. Even he knows that. I mean, in 5 years, the Corleone family is going to be completely legitimate. Trust me. That's all I can tell you about my business. Kay.
Michael, why did you come here? Why? What do you want?
I don't recall why we didn't have the scene in the original shooting, or whether we decided later we needed it, or what the reason was. But we did get Al and Diane away, a year later, or however many months had gone by to come back. And for a long time, the scene always stuck out as not being really part of the movie, but now, and really for some years now, it's all been absorbed, and I accept it and don't think he looks like a rabbi.
That we have children. Our children. Okay. I need you. And I love you.
Barzini's people chisel my territory, and we do nothing about it. Pretty soon there won't be one place in Brooklyn I can hang my hat.
We took the original set of the den, the office, that Marlon had been established in with the cat in the beginning of the first part of the film, and then we remodeled it as though it had gone through a remodel renovation in the 50s. So it's the same office, but you can see now that it looks different. It still has that desk. I actually bought that desk, the Godfather desk and that chair. I bought it from the furniture company we had rented it from, and we have it at our winery in Napa. People love to come and look at it, the same chair. It was in all three films, fortunately, because I had it.
Come under Barzini's thumb sooner or later.
And I hate that goddamn Barzini. In 6 months' time, there won't be nothing left to build on.
Do you have faith in my judgment?
Yes.
Do I have your loyalty?
Yes, always, Godfather.
Here we have a scene of the passing of authority with Michael now rising to the role of the Don and his own father acting as his consigliere, trying to break the ties with the various capo regimes, as they're called, and try to move their loyalty to his son. Lots of treachery left in this story, as you will see or you know. We now see a new kind of bodyguard starting to be present. This is Neri, who is sort of Michael's personal Luca Brasi.
Mike, why am I out?
You're not a wartime consigliere, Tom. Things may get rough with the move we're trying.
Tom. I advised Michael. I never thought you were a bad consigliere. I thought Santino was a bad Don. Rest in peace. Michael has all my confidence, as you do. But there are reasons why he must have no part in what is going to happen.
Maybe I could help.
You're out, Tom.
We, of course, didn't go to Las Vegas for the sequences in Las Vegas. These are second unit shots of signs of the period, and we actually shot the scene, the interior in the hotel in New York. This is one of those really cheap second unit shots we did. I was very embarrassed by this because in the background you see there's like hippie looking guys that are not correct for period. Now we're in New York where we shot the Las Vegas sequence.
It really looks good. This doctor did some job.
Again, it's hard to imagine, but The Godfather was, a modest budget film, and as I said, it cost $6.5 million. It was budgeted for $2.5 million, so I was way over budget, and that was partly because I made it period. So there was no money for any of those little extra shots, and we just sort of did them ourselves almost without our photographer or art department, without the actors. Godfather 2, in contrast, was, produced after the first film obviously was so successful, so I had the power to really have total say about the production, and it was a very smooth production. And really, when you consider how gigantic the film was in terms of it shot in Tahoe, LA, Las Vegas, New York, the Dominican Republic for Cuba, Sicily, and other areas, that that movie cost $11 million and was a much more beautifully produced film, and it doesn't have those embarrassing little kind of cheap second unit shots. I remember I was not too happy about shooting this scene in New York, but now that I look at it, I think obviously it was a reasonable solution.
Connie, how are you?
Hello, Mike. Nice to see you again.
We're all proud of you.
Thanks, Mike.
Sit down, Johnny. I want to talk to you. The Don's proud of you, too, Johnny.
Well, I owe it all to him.
Well, he knows how grateful you are. That's why
I didn't have a lot of confidence in The Godfather being successful, and I had a little family now with 3 children, and I didn't have much money, and I, obviously was worried about what would happen to us, and Evans was making The Great Gatsby, and they didn't have a script that they liked, and he asked if I would rewrite it. So I figured that was a chance for, 3-4 weeks to make some money. And so I did, and I was writing The Great Gatsby, and that was a hard project to adapt. And so during the news that The Godfather had been well received and was making lots of money and stuff, I was like pulling my hair out trying to figure out how to adapt this book, difficult adaptation. And I finally did it and turned it in, although the director didn't particularly use it. I don't feel that script ever got made. But by then, The Godfather was already big success, and I sort of had missed out on that, But it sort of changed my life. I suddenly was a very important director and had made this huge hit, and our lives changed very, very abruptly, which is good and not good, obviously. But it was like a fairy tale.
Buy me out. No, I buy you out. You don't buy me out.
your casino loses money. Maybe we can do better.
You think I'm skimming off the top, Mike?
You're unlucky.
In an Italian family, or at least in my family, there are always those brothers who are considered, not as talented as the others. That are made fun of, or maybe I was in that category some of the time. I don't know. I certainly had uncles that were put down. I think Italians that come from that little town mentality are very hard on their own and very cruel to those who don't quite cut the mustard at the same level that the Star brothers or the Star uncles do. And I empathized a little bit with Fredo because, he bungled guarding his father. The gun just totally slipped out of his hand in a very inept way. And I always, thought of him. How'd he feel about it? He loved his father no less than the other brothers, and he must feel so responsible for what happened. And I think maybe one of the good things that I was able to do was to have that perspective off the central action, which was, of course, the men doing men's business.
New York tomorrow. Think about a price.
Do you know who I am? I'm Mo Greene.
This actor is Alex Rocco. I thought he brought an appropriate new energy into the film at this point.
You're the consigliere, and you can talk to the Don, you can explain. Just a minute.
This is, of course, the first in a long string of building elements of Fredo and Fredo's loyalty, where Fredo tries to go straight to Tom Hagen and, argue for Mo Greene over Michael's head, as though he hasn't really accepted Michael yet and thinks of his father still as being the head of the family business. And of course, this is from the original book, but the seeds of this relationship and of these difficulties are about to grow and become more complicated, way out of the range of the first book, into the ultimate story dealing with Fredo as a traitor.
Oh, Michael, your sister wants to ask you something.
Well, let her ask.
No, she's afraid to. Connie and Carla want you to be godfather to their little boy.
No, well, we'll see.
Will you?
Let me think about it. We'll see. Come on.
So, Barzini will move against you first. He'll set up a meeting with someone that you absolutely trust, guaranteeing your safety. And at that meeting, you'll be assassinated. I like to drink wine more than I used to. Anyway, I'm drinking more.
It's good for you, Pop.
I don't know. Your wife and children, are you happy with them?
Now, when the movie was being edited, it was apparent that there was no scene, really, just a mano scene between these two great actors, Al Pacino and Marlon Brando. Of course, I remind everyone that no one thought of them as two great actors, Al Pacino and Marlon Brando, in the climate of when the movie was done. But after the movie was shot, as is so often the case, it was decided that, oh, what a missed opportunity that there was no scene just with the two of them. I was myself too busy trying to fight to get them into the picture to think of it, apparently. But because it was a good idea, I went to my friend Bob Town and asked if he would write such a scene. And he did, and this is the scene. It's quite a good scene, I think. And I'm very grateful for him to participate in this way. It was, I guess we shot it very late in the production. I can't quite remember, but it must have been very late in the production that we, put these two chairs out there and let them play the scene. I thought both of them did it very well.
I knew that Santana was going to have to go through all this. And Fredo, Fredo was, and I never wanted this for you. I worked my whole life. I don't apologize to take care of my family. And I refused to be a fool. Dancing on the string held by all those big shots. I don't apologize, that's my life, but I thought that... But when it was your time, that you would be the one to hold the strings. Senator Corleone, Governor Corleone, something.
Another Pezzanovanta.
This wasn't enough time, Michael. Wasn't enough time.
We'll get there, Pop. We'll get there.
Now listen, whoever comes to you with this Barzini meeting, he's the traitor. Don't forget that.
The scene with the grandson in the tomato patch was very disputed by Paramount. They didn't feel the scene was necessary. They were very annoyed because we didn't have tomatoes, and we had to import them from Chicago at some cost. And they felt that this guy that they had on the set always haunting me. I wouldn't say his name because he's passed away, but he was like a real thorn in my side. He was constantly suggesting I cut scenes out, and this was one of the scenes he didn't think we needed. So before lunch one day I started setting this up. They said, that scene's out, that scene's out. We don't have time for it. And, they felt, and not wrong, that all that had to be was cut to the Don Corleone's funeral and you'd know he died. But this was a little part of the book that I thought was interesting. And I set up 2 cameras and we weren't getting it. The little boy kind of wasn't cooperating, and Marlon had this idea, and he said, I do this with my kids, and he carved these little teeth out of an orange peel, and he put it in his mouth and made himself a monster, and you could see the little boy was really frightened. And as I said, we had 2 cameras doing this. We did 1 take, and when the take was over, I had not barely said cut when this guy said lunch, and everyone went off to lunch, and I often think how easy it would have been for this scene not to exist because they didn't want it, and we just got lucky, really, that we got it. Again, because of Marlon's ingenuity and because we had 2 cameras. I went back the next day and shot this part, the long shot, just to have an end for it. This is the sequence in the cemetery that the same man cut out one of the days. I normally was going to have 2 days to do this, and it was cut down to 1. I was very mad, in a very bad mood when I shot this. I figured by the time I get all these cars in and all these flowers out, already half the day was gone, and there was a whole scene left to shoot. So I was very disgruntled, and again, I wanted to use 2 cameras to try to move a little faster, and, Gordon was not a fan of using 2 cameras, and as in the book, these various celebrations and rituals are the setting for behind-the-scene negotiations and conspiracy.
Mike, can I have a minute? Barzini wants to arrange a meeting. He says we can straighten any of our problems out.
You talked to him?
Yeah. I can arrange security. On my territory.
Of course, Michael has been warned by his father in that previous scene that the one that comes to bring the deal is going to be the traitor. So Michael has one up on his adversaries. That's what fathers are for.
You know how they're gonna come at you?
They're arranging a meeting in Brooklyn, Tessio's ground, where I'll be safe.
Now in the book, The Godfather, the final coup, that this strike that Michael has been planning, that in fact we understand even was planning with his father before his father died, which was to basically kill all of the heads of the 5 families in one stroke, was really in the book goes on in detail on how this is done. Now, the interesting thing with film is that you're very often required to figure out how to condense and distill and shorten everything, figure out a way that you can do what takes 30 pages in a book and do it in just a couple of pages. And so in planning the screenplay, I had this idea of unifying all of the strikes against these families by unifying it with the baptism ceremony. This is really an innovation of the film that's not in the book. Now the baby, we needed a baby for this scene, a new baby to be baptized, and I was blessed with the birth of my daughter Sophia right around this time. So this little baby being tortured by her bonnet is my little Sophia. So Sophia came into life as a baby in The Godfather, and further complicated that she was baptized as a boy. And so this sequence that we're seeing of the baptism is something that was really created out of practicality of how can we now, she's such a cute little kid, little face. How can we kind of tell what was all these various murders and make them in one climactic scene, and that was what the baptism did.
Ego te liniolia salutis in Christo Jesu Domine nostro, rabias vitam aeternam. Amen. Credes in Spiritum Sanctum, Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, Sanctorum Communionem Remissionem Peccatorum, Carnis Resurrectionem et Vitam Aeternam, credo. Exorcisse te mundi spiritus in nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Urexias et recedes ab hoc fambum Dei Michaeli, isierim tibi impere maledictit damnat. Efrata quores ad aperire, et dona suavitatis, tuatum effugar diabri aprum quamine indicium Dei. Michael, do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth?
I do.
Do you believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son?
Turned out that the actual text of the baptism is so appropriate for what it was that was happening. We were very fortunate, but I must say that the sequence never worked, although it was cut very much as it is. It never really worked until Peter Zinner added the organ track, that building organ piece, and that's what did the trick in the end.
Michael, ingredere in templum Dei, ut habeas patem cum Christo in vitam aeternam. Amen. Credo in Deum Pater omnipotentem, creatorem caeli et terrae, et in Iesum Christum Filii eius unigenitum Dominum.
I had this idea, based, I guess, a little bit on Bugsy Siegel, that when Mo Greene was killed, he would be killed with a gunshot through his glasses into the eye. And this was an impossible effect to do because obviously you don't want to do anything dangerous near an actor's eye. And the way it was done was extremely ingenious. The glasses had 2 tubes hidden along the side. One would have like blood, and the other had like a BB and compressed air. So on the cue for the effect, the ball bearing or the BB was shot outward, and the air blew any shards of the plastic lens away from the eye, and then the blood came out second. And this was A.D. Flowers dreamt this up. I thought very, very ingenious way to do that.
I do renounce them.
And all his pomps.
I do renounce them.
The thing about violence in a film like this is that you have to try to make every moment be in some way eccentric or have some unusual, memorable aspect. So it's not just a bludgeoning or just violence, but kind of there's like some context that it's in that singles it out.
Michael Rizzi, go in peace, and may the Lord be with you. Amen.
There's my mom with that nice little bonnet with the dark dress, kissing the baby. That's really her granddaughter. These Godfather films are really, I always felt they were films about a family made by a family.
Carlos. Can't go to Vegas. Something's come up. Everybody's gonna have to leave without us.
Oh, Mike, it's our first vacation.
Hey, Connie, please. What do you want to do?
Go back to the house, wait for my call. It's important. I'll only be a couple of days. Have a nice trip, honey.
Got the bins, got the bins. Connie, come on.
We're on our way to Brooklyn. I hope Mike can get us a good deal tonight.
Sure he will.
Sal, Tom, the boss says he'll come in a separate car. He says for you two to go on ahead.
Hell, he can't do that. It screws up all my arrangements.
Well, that's what he said.
I can't go either, Sal.
Tell Mike it was only business.
I'm very proud of Abe Vigoda. This is a beautiful moment for him and with Bobby, and to think that he just got this part from being in a call with 500 other people, an open call. It really,
Tom, can you get me off the hook?
really shows how the director should always throw the casting open at least for a couple of days to give someone like that the chance to be found. Well, when the film was all shot and we returned to San Francisco, my deal was to be able to edit the film in San Francisco. And we started to work there, and it was very obvious that this movie was going to not be a short movie. We had so many scenes, so many actors, so many parts. And I was told by the studio, specifically Bob Evans told me, when you bring us the film to show us, if it's over 2 hours and 15 minutes, we're going to pull it to LA and you're going to cut in LA. So I was very anxious to edit in my own facility in San Francisco. I was so anxious to be home. And when I finished the first cut of it, it was, 2 hours and 45 minutes, and I was very worried. I said, my God, if we take it down at this length, those guys are just dying to get their hands on it. It's going to be way over 2 hours and 15 minutes. They're going to just pull it down to LA. So we looked at it, and I just cut everything out of it that I possibly could that wasn't, just germane to the story. And I got it around, 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I said, well, that's not so bad. They can't yank it down there just for 5 minutes. So we sent the movie to LA, and I got this outrageous call. My God, you've cut all the human stuff out. You've cut all the color, and you've just got the plot left here. And it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, but all the best stuff is out. So we're yanking the film down to L.A. So what I didn't realize was that the film was going to get brought down to L.A., whether it was 2 hours and 15 minutes or 2 hours and 45 minutes. So we go down to L.A., and Bob Evans says to me, well, you know, put this back and put that back. And basically, we put everything back that we had cut out from our cut of 2 hours and 45 minutes. We only cut it out in the first place to buy time to try to see if we could keep working in San Francisco and not have to go to LA and, you know, figure out how to solve the issues. You know, I didn't think the movie was going to be 2 hours and 15 minutes, but I was told it had to be. And, of course, to this day, Robert Evans says that, you know, he's the one responsible for putting all this wonderful stuff back into The Godfather. It's very, very true. It's very true that he saw that the movie at 2 hours and 15 minutes, which was the time he had given us, required that a lot of the really textured, beautiful human stuff would come out. But there was no problem putting it back in because that was what the film really was. But it was obvious that that was really just a way to make it clear that the film was going to go to L.A. I was going to L.A., and I was going to cut the movie in L.A. and not in the privacy of San Francisco. I ended up living in Jimmy Cahn's maid's room because I needed to conserve the expense money they were giving me so I could support my family. It was interesting, Godfather being such a, you know, a film associated with making a lot of money and stuff, but we really, when we were making it, we lived in this little tiny 2-room apartment practically, and as I said, when I was cutting in L.A., I was living in Jimmy Cahn's maid's room. It was really amusing what a Cinderella story the whole thing is.
Hello, Carlo.
You know, it's interesting, the details that are done, how they even go beyond what you might think. I remember when Dean Tavaleris, the production designer, put the gravel and made the walkways all gravel, it looked right, it seemed right. But little did I realize how important the sound of that gravel would be after Michael has just murdered somebody and is walking away and you hear the footsteps on the gravel. So every detail that gets put into a film, every thing that someone fights for, really finds its way into the essence of the movie in more ways than you can imagine. I remember when we were editing this movie, The French Connection came out, and I went to see it, and it was just great, you know, great, dynamic, exciting filmmaking, and, you know, wonderful performance of Gene Hackman, and really everybody, Roy Scheider. And I remember thinking, my God, compared to that, Godfather is just going to be this dark, boring, long movie with a bunch of guys sitting around in chairs talking. And I remember the assistant editor who was rewinding the reel said, yeah, I guess you're right. But, you know, every film kind of creates its own identity, and it's possible to you know, rivet an audience even without the obvious tools. You know, I was the most surprised of anyone that this picture seemed to work the way it did. But now that I look at it, I realize it was a great story and a great cast, and all the elements, all the things the various collaborators did. And in its own way, it was unusual. It was an unusual way to do a gangster picture, so personal and so authentic in terms of Italian-American life.
Michael, is it true? Don't ask me about my business, Kate.
Is it true?
Don't ask me about my
But, years ago when the film came out and it was a big success, we were all at some do somewhere or another, and Mario Puzo was there, and a couple of kind of New York cronies were around, and one guy came over to me and pointed to Mario and says, "Hey, don't you think that you made him? Remember, he made you."
This one time.
Mario Puzo was a really delightful man. He was so simple and spoke just to the point, but it was always full of wisdom. He was a very, very, very nice man. We really miss him. I think that, everything that's in The Godfather pretty much comes right out of the book. And in reading the book, those impressions or images that it suggested, really right down to the last image was there in the book. In a movie, every element, when you're lucky, comes together. In The Godfather, we had this wonderful cast. We had this wonderful composer, this wonderful music. We had this great photographer. We had this wonderful production design, a wonderful costume person, and a great book to base it on. And I remember in the old days, people would say, "Well, gee, what did you do?" And I said, "Well, I chose them."